Right, hello everybody, thank you ever so much for coming to this lunchtime event. This is sort of our inaugural MBI Technician Commitment event that we're running, a joint thing between journalists, Sainsbury's Laboratory, Owen Institute and the Quadrant as well. And today we've got Dawkins-Hall who's going to talk to us about the registration of the Science Council. I'm just doing a general introduction and some housekeeping. Today is Monday and tomorrow fire alarms are Tuesday. So there shouldn't be a fire alarm, but if there is, please use the exit at back, and the assembly point is over by the pond. You're welcome to eat your lunch if you have it. And I don't think there's anything else in there. So, I'm absolutely thrilled that there's so many of you here today. So, Lawrence, you can't see the rest of the people in the audience, but we have pretty much, I would say, a decent fullish room for you to talk to. I think everyone who's here today is somebody who's identified that they want to take a bit more ownership of their careers, and this is something that professional registration very much can help do. I myself am a chartered scientist. I went through the process back in 2018, I believe, and I think this has had a real positive influence on my career. Lawrence is also a chartered scientist, but he also now sits with the Science Council, so he's going to give you a much more in-depth explanation about what professional registration is, the different grades that you can apply for, and I'll hand over to you, Lawrence.
Thank you very much, Penny. So as you can see from my email here, my day job is a technician, a life sciences technician, I guess, which is particularly relevant to many of you in this room at the University of Leicester. However, as Penny has just indicated, I'm here in my capacity as an applicant support mentor for the Science Council. And in essence, my remit in that regard is to actually mentor and prepare candidates for this scheme, this technical validation scheme of technicians, referred to as professional registration. As I'll define as we go along, there are three registers commensurate with grade and experience: RSci Tech, or Registered Science Technician, RSci, or Registered Scientist, and CSci, or Chartered Scientist, which, as Penny indicates, I am, and Penny is as well, amongst others. There's one more register that's really designed for science school teachers, CSci Teach, so we won't focus on that. So today's session is really a prelude, actually, to an in-person visit in a few weeks' time. It's really to prime you about what registration is, why do it, the benefits, and actually the mainstay of the online application, or CAP for Common Application Portal, which is something called the Competency Report. So I will touch upon the different competencies today, but really the prime directive of my on-site visit to you guys is to actually dissect the competencies much more, because it's basically populating your competency form that is actually the onerous task with regard to your application. So in essence, next time I will talk about specific examples of competencies which you can recapitulate in terms of populating your own competency form. And the other salient thing that I'll do next time, and not today, is I'll talk about how you actually compose what I sometimes refer to as a competent competency answer, something that actually will be viewed favorably in the eyes of the two independent assessors who actually rank or mark your application. And I think with that, I'll move on to the next slide. So I'm just going to talk a little bit about who am I. So as I've just alluded to, which is essentially conducive to many of you in the audience today, I'm a life sciences technician. I have a background in biomedical sciences going back to 1987, and I had my first experience in a lab in Cambridge in 1985. In that time, or should I say subsequently, I have literally worked all over the UK as a contract technician. And in addition, I've worked in the USA as part of the Human Genome Project, and also for a biotech company in Europe, in Bavaria, for a little while. And as part of my sort of overall responsibilities, apart from carrying out personal bench work, project work of my own. I've also managed lab facilities, and I've trained new PhD students and new technicians. In my current job, in line with the evolution of what I do, that I'll come on to in a second, vis-a-vis professional registration, I'm actually now the official mentor at the University of Leicester. So apart from what I've just mentioned, 10% of my time is actually allotted to mentoring technicians in-house at my own institute, the University of Leicester. As I've alluded to, with regard to professional registration, I hold various mentor type positions, analogous positions to my applicant support mentor position at the Science Council with the IST, the Royal Society of Biology, and the National Technician Development Centre. And wearing all of those hats, I essentially do what I'm doing today. But I also offer a personal aftercare, and I'll make this sort of clear now, and you can talk to me in person when I come, that as far as I'm concerned, today, in terms of our mutual journey, it's the beginning, not the end. I don't just give you this and the sort of in-person sort of précis or dissection of the competency form and walk away. I am prepared to actually mentor you one-on-one, whether that's looking at your CV to give you an idea of your professional registration grade, which I'll talk about in a minute if you're not sure, or even to the extent that I will avail myself to actually proofreading your competency answers once you've got those down on paper. And I guess ipso facto, I will also look at your competency answers if you want me to, and I'll actually say to you whether I think they meet the admission objectives of the competencies or sub-competencies thereof. Okay. So as a result of becoming CSI in 2017 and working on a national stage, primarily doing the sort of thing I'm doing today with you guys, I've been shortlisted for a Pappin Prize in the outreach category, specifically for my sort of what you might call outreach work with regard to professional registration nationally. I've won prizes at the University of Leicester itself. And my most recent foray is actually into the world of apprentice assessment. So I was recently hunted for endpoint assessment by a company. And in fact, sort of in parallel with that, not only am I now providing workshops for the Science Councils and applicant support mentor with regard to what you might call traditional technicians coming in as school leavers or coming in as biology or chemistry graduates, I'm actually now going into the world of apprentices where they're trying to actually map different apprenticeships to the 3 registers that I will talk about in a little while. And the only thing that I want to say with regard to this slide, this really summarizes the fact that I talk at various events for these organizations, as well as sort of bespoke events online or in person, similar to today. I'm also an endpoint assessor for those organizations, okay? And what that means is that I am actually well placed as an assessor to comment specifically on the veracity and the effectiveness of your competency answers. In other words, how you actually build a competent competency form. So really what I want to do at this stage is to use my own credentials and how I transition to make a salient point. So in 2017, I became a registered scientist and I quickly transitioned to chartered scientist. There's essentially 2 sort of points I want to make in that regard. There's no actual time delay. There's no minimum time you need to make if you decide to upgrade your register. You can do it once you have your credentials the very next day. The other thing I want to make, I'm asked this a lot, is in fact, when I composed my chartered scientist competency form, I actually took a lot of the material from my registered scientist competency form and added to it. In other words, de facto, you don't need to reinvent the wheel. Okay. But the reason really for bringing this up is the fact that when you apply for your grade, and we'll talk about those 3 delineations in a second, it's not your actual grade or what your job title says you are. It's your responsibilities in the actual lab. In other words, you don't have to be a line manager to be eligible for CSI, okay? So let me make the distinction between registered scientist in one regard and chartered scientist. And this is really what misled me. And having sort of appreciated this, why I realized that effectively I'd applied for the wrong grade. A registered scientist, amongst other things that we'll define in a little while, is someone who on their competency form, they may do more than this, but they need to demonstrate that they're training others, okay? So in other words, they train somebody in a standard operating procedure, associated health and safety, sort of commensurate with good laboratory practice, but they don't necessarily need to show that they're actually investing in data interpretation for that individual and helping them design follow-on experiments. That's actually bench supervision, okay? And that's commensurate with chartered scientists. So the whole ethos of chartered scientists is about more managerial type roles. But that doesn't mean necessarily that manager is synonymous with team leader, okay? You can be an experienced technician in a lab, as I am, okay, who doesn't have a bona fide manager's grade, but who doesn't just train PhD students and new technicians, which is what you need to demonstrate as a prerequisite for our side, but actually goes that little bit further and invest in their interpretation of data, what the quality is, follow on experiments. That is bench supervision. Bench supervision de facto is a type of management. So that puts you into the chartered scientist realm. What I want to do now, before I sort of pick up on salient points in this video, is just play you a video from the Water Board, which talks about why you might want to register for professional registration.
Professional registration is a mark of excellence. Our clients are reassured that we work to the highest possible standards and quality, and they have trust in the work that we do. I think professional registration really helps me stand out from a crowd. It helps me build my confidence.
Becoming registered gave me the opportunity to get recognition for the knowledge and skills that I've developed over the period of my career. It made me feel valued. It made me feel like the things that I've achieved in my career have been recognised formally, and it's widely recognised by employers as well. I also had a mentor during the process. They were able to give me some really good advice and tips on what to include in my application, things that I hadn't even thought of myself.
After becoming professionally registered, I went back to my team. I encouraged them to become professionally registered. I offered them the support, and I would mentor them from start to finish right through the programme. For me, mentoring has been a natural progression, and it's really helped me develop myself and challenge myself going forward.
It is a tough process, but that's why it's an achievement when you do get registered scientist. I'd say get involved in as many projects as you can, allowing you to demonstrate leadership, good communication, good organisation in the application. That's really going to help you.
So what I'm going to do in the course of this talk is revisit some of the benefits of professional registration, which everyone wants to know. But before I do that, I just want to sort of put professional registration in its context in terms of the technician commitment and also why it came about. So professional registration with the Science Council provides independent recognition of your achievements and demonstrates exact standards required to join a global community of professional scientists. To me, as a bench scientist like yourself, that reads a little bit like a marketing statement. So in prosaic terms, what does that mean? What that means is that you are actually assessed by your peers. Your assessors, when you submit your application, are two independent scientists, okay? They may not be from your discipline, okay? But the actual competencies are sufficiently generic that whether you're a geneticist at the Earlham Institute or whether you're a geologist in Newcastle, okay, if you meet a particular register, what that means is in terms of your proficiency of practice, that you're actually working to the same level. And we'll talk more about this in a second, and we'll elaborate when I come next time. So really the technician commitment as a pillar of the really professional registration as a pillar of the technician commitment came about because historically, especially in academic settings, there's been an absence of accreditation for technicians. So many people like me who are veterans in universities, we find that we get to a certain grade and we really languish at that grade and we become invisible, what Kelly Veer refers to as the Cinderellas of the lab. It isn't always clear what we do, okay, to academic staff. And really to try and sort of redress that to an extent, something called the technician commitment actually was basically got off the ground. And the idea with that is to give technicians something of visibility and also a comprehensive career structure. In essence, in academia, academics have a PhD and they can aspire, even if they don't achieve it, to a certain career structure based on the presence of a PhD. It's almost as if because many technicians don't have a PhD, or if they do, it's not required for their role, that they sort of fall by the wayside. And this is what the technician commitment is designed to address. And one pillar of that is recognition, pillar 2. And essentially, and fundamentally, pillar 2 is synonymous with professional registration. And I think there's something of an existential crisis where technicians are progressively getting older because they're leaving and they're not being replaced in the same numbers. So it's projected that by 2030, there might be a shortfall of something like 700,000 technicians of various descriptions throughout the UK economy that are missing, okay? And that's because they're leaving or they're not coming into this particular profession. And it's therefore imperative that powers that be look at why technicians are leaving, why they're not coming into the job, and try and address or redress those aspects. And professional registration, this validation of your technical skills, is one component of the technician commitment designed to do that, okay? So as I'll talk more about when I visit, professional registration is assessed by a written report which looks at you in the round. It's not an academic qualification. It looks at your technical skills, but it also looks at how you plan and organize your day, how you work to certain technical and ethical standards, how you communicate with various constituents, such as specialist scientists and non-specialists, that we all communicate day to day, week to week in our job, okay? And those sort of aspects that are evaluated by professional registration are referred to as competencies. Competencies, as I'll come back to at the end in terms of where they're derived from, they're taken from the last 5 years of your career, but that can encompass one or more jobs, and we'll come back to that. And the idea is that Science Council offers professional registration in order to provide a framework that supports career progression. And as I've said, professional registration is subsumed within the overall commitment, whose aspiration is to support career progression. So I talked about the fact that there are 3 seminal registers. So let's just sort of recap on what they are. So a registered science technician is somebody with 1 year's experience. They're not a rookie, okay? They would be expected to carry out experiments independently, okay? They would follow an SOP and would be expected to generate data proficiently in the absence of intervention. They're not a total rookie. That 1 year's experience should allow them to practice independently and actually generate consistent data, be proficient and consistent in their job. It's also about how, we haven't got time really to touch on this, but most technicians, in addition to personal project work, are also managing labs on behalf of postdocs or academics. And it's how you balance those responsibilities. And we won't specifically go into that today. That's for next time. Okay. One thing that you don't have to demonstrate as an RSI tech is that you actually are able to independently actually troubleshoot experiments when you come across a data block. You would be expected maybe to put that in your competency form, but you would talk about how you referred that higher up, how you basically conferred with a postdoc or a senior technician about what is going wrong. If we contrast that with an RSci has an extra year, or in fact 2 to 5 years of experience. And apart from actually following a standard SOP, they might be expected to improvise on an SOP or optimize if they come across problems with data, which we all do. We spend a lot of time actually trying to find out why the hell our experiments aren't working. And in your competency form as an RSci, you would be expected to demonstrate that you can do it at least with a certain amount of autonomy. You might, unlike an RSci tech, train others in the SOPs, in the associated health and safety, COSH usually, and risk assessments. You may also not just housekeep a lab on behalf of others, but actually manage that lab where you sort of delegate things to others. Finally, CSci is either a managerial grade if you are a team leader, but as I say, that does not preclude you. It may be quasi-manager. It may be that you're essentially a technician at a lower grade, but you've got many, many years experience with a minimum of 5. And so it could be that you're actually designing projects from scratch using, or that you're basically innovating on methods as well as actually improvising on a standard SOP. It may be that you're actually attached to multiple projects. As I've mentioned, if you're not a team leader, you would be expected to demonstrate that you bench supervise vis-a-vis pure training per se, which is more in the realms of an RSci. However, many CSIs are bona fide team leaders or senior technicians, okay? And they may get involved in things like lab infrastructure issues. It could be that your lab is being structurally modified. It could be that you're changing or upgrading your Millique water system. And that involves dealing with outside agencies and estates and services, okay? It could be as well that both as an RSci or a CSI, that apart from managing the lab, and that may include infrastructure issues as a senior technician, that in addition, you're managing small consumables budgets. So to put that in context before I move on, if you are an RSci tech, you're probably stock taking and ordering as part and parcel of your general laboratory remit. As an RSci, or certainly a CSci, it may be that you're managing a small consumables budget as well. So what is meant by competency? And this is something that I will actually dissect in person in a lot more detail when I visit in the next few weeks. Well, essentially, the overall sort of remit of a competency form is to look at you in the round. So it's not just about your technical skills, as I've alluded to. It's about everything that you do, that you bring to your job day to day, week to week, that makes you proficient in that role. So application of knowledge and understanding is really about your science. Personal responsibility is how you plan your time vis-a-vis meeting deadlines, and that could be training others as well. Professional practice is about how you adhere to certain standards, how you update those standards and get retrained. And professionalism is really about your sort of ethical conduct through EDI, GDPR, and also your CPD in the here and now and subsequently. And I'll come on to what that means towards the end of the talk. So very briefly, application of knowledge and understanding is about how you apply yourself to your work, whether that's bioinformatics or wet-benched empirical science in the lab. As an RSci tech, you would simply follow an SOP and understand the science. As an RSci, you would devise, adapt and troubleshoot, okay? And something similar for a CSci, but maybe you'd work up methods from scratch. It isn't, however, just about the data generation through empirical science. It could be that you're actually doing literature searches as part and parcel of working up a method, or as an RSci tech to actually understand the science behind the method, okay? Also, if you look downstream, usually as a CSci or an RSci, it could be that you're expediting data generation by scripting it using a program like R, okay? Or maybe you're applying or improving how you analyze the data statistically by bringing in an updated package. So all of these things are the application of knowledge and understanding. Personal responsibility is about time management, training, if you are an RSci or a CSci, supervision, lab management at all 3 grades. And also within B, there's a section on standards. So many people use that as an option to talk about COSH, be that COSH in terms of their own experiments or as an RSci tech, RSci and CSci, but in addition, actually training others as an RSci and CSci specifically. Interpersonal skills is about how you communicate with your specialist colleagues in the lab, so they share your subject knowledge, but it's also about talking to non-specialist colleagues. These can be scientifically trained, such as medical reps or engineers for the equipment you use, but they may, as I say, particularly as a higher CSci, be people outside the realms of science, okay, such as people in finance or people in estates, if there are structural things. It could also be that you carry out or you're involved in outreach work. So that is also an example of where you talk about science, but you pitch it in a way that's explicable to non-scientists. Professional practice is about applying, updating methods, okay? It can be about, as a CSci, scoping new projects. How long will this take? How much will this new piece of kit cost? How long will it take it to get off the ground? Sort of health and safety implications, etc., etc. And finally, it can be lab-based or departmental initiatives, such as structural things, changes within labs, or even things like if you're involved in Athena Swan or professional registration, both personally as an RSci tech, or maybe as a C technician, as a CSci on a university-wide scale. So E1 is really the one of 2 last competencies. This is codes of conduct and practice. So this could be something like the Human Tissue Act, if you're dealing with human tissues, the sort of anonymity of doing that. For the sorts of work you do, it can be about very, very exacting ethical constraints if you're involved using GMSOs, but it can be something as prosaic as basically how do you conduct yourself in a manner that's basically conducive with inclusion, equality and diversity, and also as well GDPR concerns. Okay, how do you use sensitive data? How long should you keep it, etc., etc. And for an RSci tech, that may be something as simple as declaring that you've gone on mandatory courses and that you understand how these things operate in your environment. Finally, okay, codes of conduct and practice can be something as simple as, or can include, becoming professionally registered, okay? And as I've already alluded to, Athena Swan. E2 is really continuing professional development. And these are various categories of CPD that you can talk about. It can be shadowing someone at work. It can be writing or learning articles. It can be participation with a professional body, self-directed learning, reading journals, books. That goes back to what I said about A. And finally, skills that you may learn outside as a volunteer that are transferable to your actual day job. And to sort of make the point that the same theme can be multiplexed in different competencies, as well as E1 and in fact D, standards. You could actually talk about basically becoming professionally registered as part of your CPD. So these competencies, what you write about, are not mutually exclusive, okay? I think I'm going to go about 5 minutes over time. I hope that's okay, because we've built in questions. But let me just say that each competency is broken down into 3 or 4 sub-competencies, and you can write up to 1,000 words. They must be autobiographical. They must include outputs that it's worked. They can be derived from the last 5 years, but that can include not just your present job, it can include previous jobs. If you feel, as I did, then in fact a previous job is more conducive in terms of effective answers to showcase or show off yourself, okay, to exemplify your practice. If you feel a certain job is more conducive to that, you can take competencies from those jobs, and you might use your present job for other competencies. A PhD essentially is a job with study, so it's permissible to use practices in your PhD, but not an MSc. And finally, it can include unpaid internship as well as a job. So let's talk about the benefits of competencies, okay? And apologies that I am running over. I hope this isn't a problem. So the first thing that basically professional registration confers is validation of skills. And by virtue of obtaining those post-nominals, it becomes a talking point amongst your colleagues, okay? You get peer recognition. Many people who basically go through the onerous task of completing a competency form finds that it's confidence building. And it's not unusual to find that having achieved those post-nominals, which is, you know, quite a thing, okay? Quite a thing, because your competency report is 5,000 to 10,000 words long, okay? That can actually stimulate those individuals to take on other types of training. Career development and CPD, the act of actually compiling your, what you might call working portfolio to populate your competencies, allows you to reflect upon what you've done, and I think by extension, what you might want to do to actually submit the best competency form you can. So if there are skills that you would like to acquire, involve your line manager in your annual appraisal. Talk to them about your professional registration, okay? Say, I'd like to learn this. And the other thing that's pertinent in that regard is that this isn't time limited. It's not an assignment. So if you want to spend 1 year compiling your relevant evidence, okay, to populate subsequently your competency form, you can spend a year doing it. There are no time constraints. Outside prospects and society engagements and networking, okay? So when you become professionally registered, you network through a licensed body that we'll come on to in a minute, okay? And that in itself can afford opportunities such as the ability to actually participate in conferences or write journal articles, and I'll give you an example of that in a second. And that, of course, in itself is useful for your competency form. If not in your initial application, then subsequently 1 year hence in your renewal via your CPD form. Job prospects, okay, and what I'd say about this is in very few places, particularly in universities, does the acquisition of professional registration sort of inexorably lead to improved career. I know of a couple of people who I have mentored that became CSI, that got promotions on the strength of it. But in many institutions who are signatories to the commitment, that isn't true right now, but clearly that is an aspiration of the overall technician commitment, okay, as part of improving technician prospects, okay, and retaining them. But I will say this, that's extant today. Many application forms for jobs actually ask for professional registration as part and parcel of desirable characteristics. Okay, so if you do not fill out that part of the application form, that will not improve your chances of getting to interview. And let me say this as well. I know of a manager in Manchester who, when he has candidates for jobs and the application comes across his desk and he can see that they're professionally registered, straight away he knows that he's dealing inter alia with a dynamic candidate, and so he looks upon those people favorably. But I'll give you one more example, okay, that sort of impacts on the fact that a PhD is no substitute for professional registration. So sometimes I'm asked, I have a PhD, is a CSI therefore necessary? And my honest answer to that one is, if you're wanting to pursue a wholly academic career, I would say, hand on heart, if I'm honest, no. However, if you're looking to rise up the ranks of a technical career, maybe one day become a technical manager, or move sideways into professional training, marketing within your institute, absolutely, a CSI or professional registration is beneficial in addition to a PhD. And that's fundamentally because a PhD looks at your training and your academic knowledge. It's very circumscribed, whereas CSI, RSci and RSci Tech talk about you in the whole. So I'm going to make one tangible sort of statement with regard to that. One manager I know, another manager, had a job where it came down to a 2-horse race. One had a PhD without CSI. Conversely, one had CSI without a PhD, and ultimately the job was given to the one with a CSI and not the PhD, because that manager could actually deduce that the person in question could hit the ground running. I've talked about benefits, and these are just to sort of remind you what the benefits are in the context of a licensed body that we'll come on to in a minute. Apologies, I'm over time. So I mentioned that one of the benefits of professional registration is you have to join a licensed body. And one example of that is IST. You will network through joining a licensed body with or without professional registration, okay? And that will afford opportunities such as attending conferences, okay? Maybe participating in conferences, maybe writing for licensed body specific magazines, okay? So what you make of this is entirely up to you. And this is really just to reinforce the point that many jobs today ask, apart from the usual requisite technical skills, professional registration with an accredited professional body or working towards this, which usually means joining a licensed body, which today is sort of a prima facie indication that you will go on to become professionally registered. I'm going to finish by talking, because I'm a little over, about the licensed bodies themselves. So there are 26 licensed bodies that fall under the umbrella of the Science Council. And not surprisingly, they cover a plethora of scientific disciplines. If we split them up, you can essentially split them into two categories, okay? They are subject specific, such as the Institute of Physics, or for many of you here, and my Penny and myself are an example of this, we're members of the Royal Society of Biology as biomedical scientists, okay? However, it isn't just about your subject discipline, it can be about the actual vocational practice. So it can be, as a biologist, you might be a food scientist, or as a physicist, you might be practicing in physics of engineering in medicine. Now, whether you choose the IOP or the RSB, or respectively IPEM or the IFST in that particular context is entirely up to you. The one thing I would say is that science, I think, it's axiomatic to state that science is a broad church. And so it could be that having perused 25 of those licensed bodies, and I've given you the URL here, that you can't find one that fits you. I would suspect that many of you in this room, RSB would be a good fit. But if it's not a good fit and you can't find, moreover, anybody that fits you, you always have the fallback option of going for the Institute of Science and Technology, which, as the mantra goes, is a professional body run by technicians for technicians, including myself, who has a sort of executive position on it. So as long as you're a technician, irrespective of discipline, there's always the option of actually registering for a licensed body as part of your application through the IST. I'm coming to the end now. So essentially, when you register, there's a registration fee, and there's also a membership fee as part and parcel of joining a licensed body. So there are the figures there. And basically, many institutes under commitment provisions either pay for the initial registration costs, including the fee and the associated licensed body membership fee, and stroke or subsequent renewal, CPD, okay? You have to submit a report 1 year down the line in order to demonstrate that you're still practicing to those same levels commensurate with your register, and therefore keep your post-nominals on a register. And I'm led to believe, for people in your audience, that both the initial costs and the downstream registration, downstream CPD that allows you to continue to keep your name on the register as an RSci, say, or as an RSci Tech, are being paid for you. I'm coming to the end now. So this is the URL to apply. This is the portal for the online application via the Science Council, the so-called Common Application Portal, or CAP. And this really is just reiterating the fact that 1 year down the line, you essentially submit a CPD report, which in essence is the same CPD categories that you utilize as part of your application in E1. There's a fee that I think in your case is being underwritten. But the point I want to make is the competency report is 5,000 to 10,000 pages long on average as a ballpark figure, whereas you don't need to reinvent the wheel for your CPD renewal. It's essentially salient examples of each of these categories, and you have to fulfill each of these categories. And generally, it's about 7 pages long. So at that point, as I'm a little bit over, I'm going to say thank you. But before I stop sharing, I would encourage you via Penny or via my own email address to actually gain a copy of these talks, because there actually are URLs within this that point to sort of examples of literature on the Science Council website that will help you. So this is a sort of taking you by the hand guide from zero to hero, starting out, culminating in your actual application and hitting that submission button. It takes you through every stage. This is actually an online registration video I gave on behalf of the IST in Glasgow. It's the best part of 2 hours long, so it pretty much covers everything you need to do. There are many questions that come up frequently. They're prevalent in my talk, and I've compiled those on the IST website, FAQs. And finally, there are 3 videos I would encourage you to watch from the Royal Society of Chemistry, Katie Dryden-Holt, that cover every aspect of professional registration, and they're very watchable. Thank you.
Thank you ever so much, Lawrence. That was a really fascinating, enjoyable talk. Are you happy to take questions?
Yes, I am. Yeah, I can give you as long as you want. And in fact, beyond this session, if there's anyone that wants to stay on, as long as I get my cup of tea in half an hour, I'm happy to take questions.
You got any questions? I can add. Yeah, so thanks, Lawrence, again. So for a lot of people who come in today, this will all be very new information, and it may be that once you start your journey, it becomes a bit more apparent. So there's probably a lot of words in there that you're probably thinking, oh, goodness. So essentially, if you work in a science environment, which most of you will do, you will, if you've been here for more than a year, registered science technician, you will definitely qualify for. Essentially, if you've been here for 2 years and you're working at graduate level, registered scientist is the level you'll be going for, and for those of you who are working at postgraduate or equivalent level, you've been here for 5 years and you can demonstrate the competencies, chartered scientist would be where you'll be aiming for. Now, the actual process of applying for professional registration, it is a huge undertaking. You will be asked to dig quite deep into reviewing yourself. But actually, in the process of doing that, I think you'll find it quite empowering, because I think sometimes we can sort of finish university or whatever your education is, and then you can kind of sort of get into that sort of sleepwalking through your career. So actually having that opportunity to stop and actually review where you are in your career is actually quite a powerful tool. And it's not for the faint-hearted. So a lot of people will open these forms and they'll just go, oh, and they won't carry on. And then at the end of that first year, you will then be asked to, again, I'm not sure the different levels, but for chartered scientists, I have to commit to 15 hours of continual professional development each year. And a lot of you may think, oh God, that's a lot, but actually we're doing it already. So it's an opportunity for you to stop and go, oh, I'm doing this already. So you may think that you've been in the same job for years and you may think you're not progressing, but we're all progressing. You may not realise that you're progressing. So this is a really powerful tool for making you stop and look at what you're doing. Most of you will be familiar with the performance reviews that you do each year. So it's very different to that. So you can actually, so rather than looking at your job description and your milestones that you have to do each year, come look at the things that you're interested in. And actually in doing these, you'll probably quite see that the things that you're doing on the side tend to be the things that you're more interested in. It's a really powerful way of actually going, actually, I really enjoy some of the outreach stuff that I'm doing much more than the job that I'm here to do. So it's a way of you sort of exploring the things that you're interested in. And for example, Lawrence, you talked about some of the things that you might do outside. So for example, I know some of you are on school committees. So those are sort of things that you can sort of pull in. So it's just looking at you as a wider professional and using some of those experiences going forward. Would you agree with some of those comments, Lawrence?
I think that pretty much, I mean, I think you've reiterated many of the things that I've said, Penny. And what I'd say to you is when you start this process, one, consult literature on not just the Science Council website, which I focused on today in my capacity as a support mentor, why I'm here today, but also look at the licensed bodies. Once you decide if it's the RSB or the IST, for example, if that's for you, or if you're a physicist or an engineer, actually look at their websites as well, because there's a lot of information. And to sort of reiterate a point, if there's anything you're not sure about, drop me a line at either my Science Council website address or the one that I've put on here. But it is about thinking outside the box. The whole sort of mission of professional registration is to look at you in the round. It's not an academic qualification. Think about what you do in your job and how you do it, how you plan your time, how you interact with different people in your job, not just your colleagues, because all of that is substrate, if you like, for reflective practice or competency answers. And take your time. If you want to spend a year doing this, basically write things down, okay, and then sort of mull over it and think about things that you might want to do, as I've said, going forward. And as Penny's alluded to, think about things that interest you. Is there any way, as part of your annual appraisal, that you can basically make your line manager aware if they're not, and maybe explore those things a little bit more? Because if they're relevant to the competencies, then they're basically bona fide material. And I suppose the one point I didn't make extensively, because I'm going to do this next time, is that if you have a theme, you can actually contextualize it for the different competency headings. They don't have to be different examples, because clearly what we do when you do an experiment, you might train others. You're certainly planning, okay? So you talk about the experiment and the understanding in A. The planning is obviously personal responsibility, B, okay? If you're training others, that's communication, C. So how you pass this, how you configure that competency form is entirely up to you. There's no such thing as a right or wrong answer. You know, this isn't physics, deriving things from first principles, okay? It's just being clever about what you put in and how you write it. And in terms of how you write it, that's something that I'll go into much more when I visit in a few weeks.
So with that in mind, so Lawrence is going to come back. So what we're interested in now is both of you who are keen to sort of explore a bit further what this is all about. So we're going to organise a workshop for Lawrence to come back and actually sort of help people actually tackle how they apply for these forms. But I'm around. I'm quite happy to expand on my own experience with professional registration as well. It's one of those things that it's really hard to explain. You essentially you get out what you put in. So if you do this and you expect something out of it, you've got to put it in as well. So you know, it's very much about taking ownership for your own careers going forward. I think we probably, because I appreciate people here on their lunch break. So for those of you who would like to make a swift exit, then I think that's probably fair enough. Any of you who want to stay behind and talk a bit longer, also happy to do that. And I've got the silent sheets back. You can just put your name on there if you're interested. If you can't stay, but you'd like some further information about the follow-up event that we're going to do, then we'll get it back to you and make sure that you get included to know when it's going to happen. Awesome. So thank you so much, Lawrence.
My pleasure. My pleasure.
Yeah, it is actually. Yeah. Okay.